Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well, and let's talk about Mercedes, because Mercedes, after just one race in the 2023 season, they packed their bags from Bahrain, but it also feels like they might have packed their bags on this 2023 season and be completely giving up on this entire year. Toto Wolff came out after the Grand Prix and said, one of the worst days in racing that he's been a part of. Really not good at all. We're lacking pace front, right and centre. That's the reflection of the tests. The Aston Martin is very fast. They deserve that. And the Red Bull is just on a different planet. With the team, after just one race, being beaten on pace by Red Bull, by Ferrari, and by Aston Martin, it looks like they're just giving up on this year. And that feeling seems to be coming from both the team and the drivers, to be honest with you. Lewis Hamilton, Toto Wolff, and George Russell have all spoken out after the Bahrain Grand Prix, starting with Toto Wolff, the team principal. Leading on from that quote that I just had, Toto Wolff also came out and said that they need radical change in their philosophy. Given the gap to the front, of course, we're going to look at bigger departures and more radical changes. Lewis Hamilton not happy at all, saying he knew it was going to need work as soon as he got in the W14 car, saying, I knew from the moment I drove the car, we were where we were and the challenges that we would be facing. And Russell even saying that Red Bull have basically guaranteed themselves winning every single Grand Prix of this season. I wouldn't be surprised if Red Bull won every race this year. All three of them coming out and being incredibly negative after the Bahrain Grand Prix. And of course, there's going to be frustration. This is a team that won 8 Constructors' Championships on the bounce. Only 2 years ago, they were still Constructors' Champions in Formula 1. And we actually were getting to the point where we were labeling them boring for just winning everything consistently over and over again. People were complaining that Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes were too good and Formula 1 needed to change that at some point soon, otherwise they just get bored with the sport entirely. So how has it gone from that 3 or 4 years ago to being so wrong so quickly? I think the real nail in the coffin for this Mercedes concept has been the fact that Aston Martin have made such massive steps forward in this 2023 season. Coming out of Bahrain, everybody was talking about Fernando Alonso and that podium that he managed to pick up in that Aston Martin car. And why would you not? It was absolutely incredible to see him finish in front of both Mercedes cars and in front of Carlos Sainz in a Ferrari. Probably would have finished behind Charles Leclerc, so they're kind of in and around that second place, third place in the Constructors' Championship, seemingly displacing Mercedes from the top 3. And the reason that that is so crucial to Mercedes is that they are powered by a Mercedes power unit. They are beating the Mercedes team with the Mercedes engine. They are beating the Mercedes team with the Mercedes gearbox and seem to be getting better out of the Mercedes team's hardware. Because fundamentally, when it breaks down to it, it's the same power unit, a different concept, and a drastically different outcome. If you were going to be a gambling person and pick which team was going to get the best out of the Mercedes hardware, you'd gamble it's going to be the Mercedes team. And I think that word concept has been bandied around a little bit when we're talking about Mercedes versus Aston Martin versus Red Bull versus Ferrari, the concept that each of those teams have gone with, when really what we're looking at fundamentally is the aerodynamic package, because the concept is the same underneath at Mercedes and Aston Martin. I think that's the thing we can now say about Mercedes. The concept that they've gone for, the philosophy that they've decided to design around, just clearly isn't working with these 2022 regulations. It might work in the wind tunnel, it might work in the simulator, but it's not working when you get that Mercedes car out on track. I know there's a no blame culture when it comes to Mercedes, and they've already sent out a letter to their fans apologizing for this 2023 season, which seems a little bit drastic considering we've only had one race out of 23, but it clearly shows that they know there's something that needs to change. Although having said that, I don't think there's an easy fix for Mercedes moving forward. Let me explain where I think this problem stemmed from. For me, I think the Mercedes problem that they have in 2023 actually came from 2022. I think that they felt like they were getting closer and closer to getting this concept to work, especially towards the end of the 2022 season. Lewis Hamilton looked incredibly quick, was picking up podium after podium. George Russell was also getting closer to podiums, picking up podiums, and of course that win in Brazil. It felt like the Mercedes car was getting closer and closer to the front of the pack in the Ferraris and in the Red Bulls. So they clearly thought that if they continued with this concept and they kept getting closer and closer to the Ferraris and the Red Bulls, and then they had 3 months away from the track to really hone in on the fundamentals of this concept, maybe they could make that jump. Maybe they could find that extra half a second to get them right up to the top and right next to Red Bull coming into this 2023 season. The problem is they probably did find that half a second, but everybody else on the entire grid, I think Red Bull, Ferrari, all the way down to Williams, look like they've found even more than Mercedes. Mercedes almost look like they've stood still and everybody else has progressed forwards and everybody else has got a little bit better over the winter break in comparison to where Mercedes find themselves in this 2023 campaign. And I think if you look up and down the grid, it's fairly easy to understand why they've done that. They've seen the Ferrari car, they've seen the Red Bull car, and the 7 other teams on the grid have moved towards one of those 2 directions. Even a combination, you can see the Alfa Romeo, the Haas have easily gone towards the Ferrari car, and even the Alfa Romeo, I would argue, has little bits of Red Bull intertwined into it. And then you look at the other cars, the McLaren looks closer to the Red Bull car. It's just that everybody has seen those 2 concepts, and they're the 2 concepts that they've moved towards. Nobody has moved towards the Mercedes concept. And when you've got hundreds of engineers, thousands of people at these factories, all working on the same project under the same regulations, and nobody is moving towards what Mercedes are going for, that kind of makes me worry about it a little bit. So clearly the next step for Mercedes then is just to sack off their car and copy the Red Bull car like everybody else has been doing, moving towards that Red Bull philosophy in some way. And the problem with that is Mercedes can't be a copycat team. Mercedes can't get away with just copying the Red Bull. If you're in a midfield battle and you're just trying to overcome the rest of the midfield, say you're trying to finish 4th in the championship, you can copy the Red Bull car because you're not actually really trying to compete with the Red Bull car at the end of the day. Mercedes are trying to compete with the Red Bull car, so they do need to not only get the Red Bull car, plus a little bit extra. If you want to win, and that's always got to be the goal at Mercedes, you have to innovate in some way. Like, even if they literally took a Red Bull car, Christian Horner said to Toto Wolff as a gift, here is a Red Bull car, you can have it at the Mercedes factory, and you can race it in Saudi Arabia, they still would be second best, because even though they've got an incredible driver pairing in Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, they could put them straight into that Red Bull car. Max Verstappen and the team around him have understood that concept for 2 years now. They've been working on it for 2 years now. They understand the fundamentals of it for those 2 years. Mercedes, even if they're given that car right now, it's going to take them a little while to adapt to it. And to find actual performance, they'd have to tweak it in one way or another. I know that I like to joke about Aston Martin being a green Red Bull. Christian Horner, Sergio Perez have even come out as well and sort of poked fun at the Aston Martin and how much it looks like the Red Bull 19. But if you look at it and the minutiae, yes, the concept overall is very similar, but it's also got a little bit of Ferrari in there. The way that the side pods are designed has a little bit of Ferrari in there. It's very similar to the Red Bull externally, but Red Bull's personnel that have come into that Aston Martin team have clearly also put their own spin on it. They've yoinked and tweaked it a little bit, right? They've taken the fundamentals that they knew from that Red Bull setup. Dan Fallows is the one that everybody is talking about right now, but he has put his own spin on it. He's designed it in a way that he is more comfortable with. And that's where Mercedes are going to struggle, right? So even if they just copy that Red Bull car, they've still got to have the people in and around them that they can trust to do that tweaking, to find those fundamental changes that not only get it to the Red Bull, but make it even better than the Red Bull car. What it comes down to is how much you trust that Mercedes team moving forward. I think if you just look at the top layer, they've got an incredible driver pairing in Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, arguably the best driver pairing on the Formula 1 grid. They've got Toto Wolff still running the team, and he's shown that he can get the absolute best out of that Mercedes team when given the opportunity to, and when given a car that is very successful, he knows how to extract that extra tenth, that extra 2 tenths out of the team to get them to synergize incredibly well and win championships. And the team behind him have shown that they can design a car that is incredibly quick. They dominated the turbo hybrid era for a reason. You don't just completely lose all of that ability overnight. They still have the fundamentals of that team there to be incredibly impressive in Formula 1. They made a mistake with their concept. They went for it a little bit too long. I think there was maybe a little bit of stubbornness in that Mercedes team. As I mentioned, because it was getting better in 2022, they almost thought, we can do this. We're Mercedes. We've won all these championships in the past. Surely we can't be wrong about this concept. I know that nobody else is going towards it, but we feel like we are right about this. And maybe it's a little bit of arrogance from the Mercedes team as well in that way. The stubbornness, the arrogance that they almost deserve to have because they've been so successful over the last few seasons has kind of stood in the way of them progressing in this 2022-2023 era of Formula 1. But I think the Mercedes team are now at that turning point. They're at the fork in the road where they need to choose the correct direction moving forwards. It's difficult as a modern Formula 1 fan to not see the Mercedes car and just think they're going to win every single Grand Prix because that's what they've been doing over the last decade. But at the same time, nothing lasts forever in Formula 1. You're the best team until you're not. If you look at Red Bull, they were so dominant with Sebastian Vettel. It looked like nobody was ever going to be able to catch them. And then Mercedes came. Before that, it was Ferrari. You've got the Renaults winning a couple of championships. Sometimes these things go through cycles, and Mercedes are now dipping down. And That's the thing with Formula One. You can either dip down and come back again, like we've seen with Red Bull. They waited 8 years for that Constructors' Championship, but they got back there eventually. Or you can fall into obscurity. We're looking at Ferrari not winning a championship since 2008. We're looking at Williams, who looked like an untouchable force in Formula One a few decades ago, and they just have fallen off, and they were right at the back of the grid. Now, am I saying that Mercedes are going to be 10th place in the Constructors' Championship in 10 seasons' time? Who knows? But I don't think they will be. They've got an incredible amount of backing behind them, and I think they've got the team to put this right. But it's going to take a lot of time. And if you're a Mercedes fan, you need to have that expectation that you're not going to be battling at the front of the grid really anytime soon, I don't think. If you're Lewis Hamilton, you're George Russell, you're just kind of putting your helmet on in this 2023 season, going out there, getting the best that you possibly can, but it's damage limitations at this point. I think you're looking at Aston Martin, you're looking at Ferrari, you're looking at Red Bull, and you're almost seeing what you can learn from those teams rather than can we compete with those teams. But that's just my thoughts and feelings on the Mercedes team right now. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below, because it's such a curious case with Mercedes right now, with Lewis Hamilton, with George Russell, with Toto Wolff, all being so negative. Is there anything that they can get out of this 2023 season that would actually be positive for them moving forward? I'd love to know your thoughts, as I said, in the comments below. I love these conversations that we're able to have on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like if you're new, subscribe to the channel as well, and I'll see you next time.